Welcome to Turn 1, a Formula One podcast. Now entering the grid. Here are your hosts, Thomas and Jeremiah.
Dude, I've got two things for you. One, Alpine. Wow. And number two, K-Mag. Oh, yeah.
The Haas had a showing, didn't they?
Oh, man. For those of you just joining, this is the Miami Grand Prix race recap for Turn 1 podcast. Thomas, why don't you give me some thoughts on what you kind of saw in qualifying and practice this weekend?
Okay, McLaren stinks. So that's number one. I made the note watching qualifying that Mercedes could struggle on race day. We'll get to that a little bit more because they struggled in every single qualifying session. Something about that Miami track. So I think you probably noticed this too. They laid down a brand new track surface, which they mentioned several times throughout the weekend. And it's probably the track that has to warm up the most out of any other tracks on the grid. Like, it was crazy, the time differences from their first laps to their last laps. And then kind of finally my note on qualifying, without getting into the results, there's two types of curbs in Miami. One, you're going airborne, or two, you're sliding out and losing your back end.
Yeah, I kind of noticed the same thing. Miami is very close quarters. Some of these turns come at you pretty quick. My kind of thoughts for qualifying, we did see a horrible blunder by the Ferraris as Charles Leclerc slaps a wall, thus ending qualifying early, which means Max doesn't get that final run. Lewis Hamilton doesn't get that final run, and they kind of just all drop.
Well, I've never understood why the drivers don't get that lap in like Sergio did. Just bank one, get a good one, and then go try to perfect it. But they always wait, and that is the risk of waiting, is you have a red car slide into the barriers.
Well, to your effect, it's what you mentioned earlier. So the track gets better and better and better after every single lap. More rubber gets left, and the track gets faster. There's just more grippy. You can take the turns better. So with that being said, I can see why they waited, but to your point, Max definitely should have came out and just laid one down like Sergio did.
Yeah, so it was a Q3, but it wasn't a traditional Q3. You had Sergio take pole, which, okay, fair enough. Fernando Alonso gets second. That kind of holds up for how the season's going. But then Carlos Sainz gets third.
I will say it was cool to see an all Hispanic Latino podium for the qualifying as we're going into the very well. And the reason why is because Miami is such a multicultural place. For those that aren't aware, you can walk 3 blocks in Miami and not hear any English. It's wild.
I think they said on the broadcast 70% of households speak Spanish in the Miami area, which is crazy. Your biggest surprise of qualifying had to be K-Mag.
Sticking it to fourth, my man K-Mag.
Just like every other instance of him qualifying high, it doesn't really play out in the race, but still a really good result for the Haas car.
No, but that's okay, because at the end of the day, you have a Haas getting to Q3, which is wild.
Okay, what were your quick thoughts on our race?
Like I said, man, Alpine looked awesome. I really like the way that they looked this race this weekend. I think they brought a good package, both of them too, not just one of them, and one of them out in the field somewhere, which is really cool to see. Other than that, Max Verstappen, bad start, but good race, and we'll get into that. I kind of want to dive into turn 1, if you don't mind.
Go for it.
So I always, on tracks like this where turn 1 and turn 2 are kind of like right there next to each other, I kind of combine them so that you can get the full view of the action that happens. So the top 3 don't change. It's still Perez, Alonso, Sainz, but then you start to see some movement, right? So we see Magnussen immediately drop back to 6th as Gasly and Russell kind of just pretty much take him off of turn one. He didn't have the best start, and that might contribute, or that might be attributed to the fact that it's a Haas, but we don't know. Leclerc stays the same over at 7. Bottas jumps up 2 spots as he hops over not only Verstappen but Ocon, because we talked about this in a later or an earlier episode, but Verstappen doesn't get the best launches this year. I think that on this race it was on purpose because he was trying to play it safe. He knew he had the pace, he knew the car, so he didn't really need to get off the line with full throttle. Rounding down, we have Albon stays the same. Hamilton jumps Hulkenberg, which is kind of expected. Zhou Guanyu stays right where he's at 14th. Piastri. So this is where this is where you start to see the action of turn one. Here's what goes down. So check this out. We have De Vries dogpiling into the back of Norris. And yes, De Vries started ahead of Norris, but Norris actually got a great jump on those soft tires, overtakes De Vries, and then immediately gets scooted right off the track. And we see Piastri take advantage of this the most as he jumps up 4 places. He's coming from 19th, jumps all the way up to 13th, which is great for him. Or I'm sorry, not 13th, 15th. My mistake. That's bad math. Tsunoda stays the same. We see Stroll jump Tsunoda and, of course, Norris because of everything that happened. So Norris drops clear on back down to 19th. De Vries drops clear on back down to 20th. And we see Sargent take 2 spots as he goes from 20th to 18th. That rounds out your turn one.
It was a good turn one, and I'll bring it up here because as we go into lap one, we'll get into the lap by lap here. They played a very close follow the leader all through laps like 1 through 3. They were all single file after the first turn. They were all right on each other's bumper, but nobody was taking any risks or dive bombing corners or going wheel to wheel down straightaways. And we started noticing this in Baku and in a couple of races before, take Australia out of the mix. The drivers all seem to be running a fairly conservative season early on. And I wonder if that's just because they're trying to find their place in the standings or trying to figure the car out. Maybe we'll see them take more risks later on, but so far, very little risks from any of the teams.
I think that comes down to the fact that with the cost cap, they have way less parts available to them than they would normally have. So it's one of those things where you cannot give up any parts because that's an automatic grid penalty in the future. Why don't you take us through kind of like a basic lap by lap of the whole race, and we can kind of trade back and forth on some thoughts and on some of the things that happened.
Sure. So we covered turn 1 and lap 1. They were all playing follow the leader, no real movement after the first set of first 3 turns there. There's been questions in the past couple of years about Sergio Perez and can he dominate a track. I think this year we're seeing that he can dominate a track. On lap 2, he had a 1.4 second lead on Alonso and pretty much held that until the pit stops started around lap 16, 17. I'd made the note that by lap 2, Magnussen was down to 7th from his starting 4th. I'll be fair to Magnussen. Like, it's a great thing that he got 4th. Like, that's really the only way the Haas is going to get points is to start high and drop down. They are rarely going to start low and work their way into the points. So it was good to ultimately see him finish the day in the points. I believe he got 10th, but we'll get to the results later. And then Sargent pits for a new wing on lap 2, which the commentators were very confused why he was coming into pit. And then they saw the wing come out and they're like, oh, there it is. I have a couple of lap highlighted, so I'm not going to go through every single lap, but lap 3 is one that I highlighted and underlined, and I'll read it to you as I wrote it in real time. K-Mag passes Leclerc, Verstappen pushing up behind Leclerc. Leclerc takes 6th back, goes wheel to wheel with K-Mag down the main straight. Verstappen passes both. Battle goes into lap 4 as Verstappen 6, Magnussen 7, Leclerc 8. A very through goes Hamilton moment for Max Verstappen.
I just want to throw in what I wrote down for lap 3 because I think you'll enjoy this. So here's what I wrote for lap 3. Charles passes K-Mag, K-Mag passes Charles, Max passes both.
Through goes Verstappen. Because he was 3rd in that battle between Leclerc and K-Mag, and then after 2 turns comes out as the leader of the pack. Okay, moving on. Lap 4, Hamilton calls into the team and he's unsure if the car can make it the distance, but he's very vague as to what the issues is. Is it a tire thing, a suspension thing, an engine thing? No one seems to know, but he's unsure if he can go the distance.
Lewis actually makes contact with, I can't remember who it was. I think it's Hulkenberg. So
It was
Lewis Hamilton
Hulkenberg.
gets sandwiched between two drivers, and you can see Nico Hulkenberg's back left tire on the side, which is the side that Lewis Hamilton was on. You can see it kind of shift as Lewis turns to the right. So I'm thinking that he might have tapped the wing, and he was kind of upset, not knowing if it was going to make it the whole distance or if it was going to start to deteriorate over the time.
Lap 5, both McLaren's pit softs were not the move to start the race on. They were the only team to not start on mediums or hards. They have the mindset of being a top constructor, and they are not a top constructor this year. You cannot start on softs at the bottom of the pack and work your way up through the field if you don't have a car capable of working up through the field. And so for them to start on softs, they just put themselves behind everybody from the jump and ruin their day. Skipping down a little bit, lap 8, you hear that Sergio Perez is now nursing his front right tire. You'll hear this a couple times throughout the race, and that's why he's just kind of maintaining a 1 to 3 second lead over Fernando Alonso. But for the bulk of the race between the start and the first pit stops, the battle was for 4th and 5th and 6th and 7th between Gasly, Russell, Verstappen. K-Mag got in the mix. Hamilton eventually got in the mix. So we were watching pretty much Sergio and Fernando run away from the pack, and then Verstappen work his way up from his starting 9th all the way up to where he was eventually in 4th for a while. I made the note before the race. I wrote down a couple of expectations or things that I was going to watch for. And one of them was, does Lance Stroll make his way up the pack as you would expect a top 3 constructor to do? Because Lance Stroll started in 18th in that Aston Martin. It was a huge disappointment considering Alonso got 2nd. So I started kind of tracking his progress. By lap 9, he'd made it up 2 spots to 16. Okay, it's not Max Verstappen performance, but he's moving up the field. And he continued to do that throughout the day. So I'll comment on that. Lap 11. So Lewis Hamilton started in 13th. He just got stuck in a horrible DRS train between 13th and 10th, and he could not gain any ground on any of them.
No, I kind of wrote the exact same note, is that Lewis Hamilton was stuck in a DRS chain that he could not get out of. But I did want to note that in pretty much at around lap 7, lap 8, we kind of realized that Max Verstappen on the hards is faster than every single car on the grid. And they're all on mediums. So it's just not a good look as he carves his way through the pack, catching up to Checo. It's just not a good look.
Another one of the things to watch for that I put before the race started was Verstappen needs to be in the top 3 by lap 26. I didn't really have any math or reasoning on that, other than I thought if it was any longer than that, the front 2 cars or front 3 cars might be too far ahead for him to catch, right? That's where the race is really spread out. So I made the note on lap 14 that he was 3rd. So he did it 12 laps before I thought he would, and he was immediately on Alonso when he made the pass to get into 3rd.
It was kind of funny to me to notice on lap 12, Perez sets the fastest lap, and that immediately gets overdone by Max on the hard.
Yeah,
that's bad.
It was every time Perez would get the fastest, 10 seconds later, Verstappen would take it back. Something interesting to watch for throughout the season. We wonder about that Aston Martin car. Is it really an awesome car? Like, we know it's in a good car, but like, is it better than Mercedes? Is it better than Ferrari's car? Or is it just, Fernando Alonso working magic with it? Carlos Sainz could not catch or pass Fernando Alonso, even with DRS. He had DRS for laps and laps and laps. Made up ground, lost it. Made up ground, lost it. Never could pull the trigger on passing Alonso.
No. He kept getting ground, like you said, but then Alonso would just seems like he would just step on the gas and then he was gone.
A quick aside here, as I get to, I wrote this in lap 18. The race was kind of spread out. We were getting a lot of pit stop action. So there was a lot of like in and out of the pit stop and people not being in their true race position. And this is for the folks that are new to Formula One, kind of still like we are. If you're watching a race and it seems like after 15, there's not a lot of action, right? Like clearly in the start of the race, there's a ton going on. But then as the race spreads out, you're watching other things and you're like, where's all the stuff going on? You're watching the wrong place. The action shifts from the track to the pit wall. It's the strategy. It's when to pit, what tires, how many pit stops do you need, when to push versus when to save, when to manage. The battle becomes more mental and statistical rather than track battling, right? That's where you hear the drivers come on and say plan A, plan B, plan C. I need these tires to go 5 laps more. I'm going to run these tires 10 laps less, whatever they're saying. half the track started on mediums and half the track started on hards. That is very important to watch when you're watching these races, because that's going to set you up for a strategical battle on lap 17. Teams have to make that call if they're on mediums to go pit for the hard tires. Then on lap 40, the people on hard tires have to go pit for mediums. And so this whole time they've been having this little mental back and forth. And then the track battle is also those one-on-one dogfights, right, for positions. Like we talked about the battle for fourth between Verstappen and Gasly and whoever else it was. And then finally, my note on this is safety cars play a big part of strategy. That played a big part in it because there was no safety car. There was no virtual safety car. There were no yellow flags even really throughout the race. It was a super clean race. So if you were betting on chaos, you lost and you probably didn't get points.
McLaren. I did have a note that Verstappen was kind of babying those hards for as long as he could, because he himself was actually also waiting for a safety car so that he could get off those hards and have some fresh tires and some good action going right in front of him.
Okay, so that was my quick aside. My little, if you're not sure what to watch after the first couple of laps, that's where to watch. It's the strategy.
Yeah, I did want to add that on lap 18, Leclerc pits. And the reason I wanted to note this is because he comes behind K-Mag. And that's when we really start to see a good battle. Because for the next few laps, you watch this battle of Charles and K-Mag and Charles and K-Mag. And we'll get into that more as the laps progress. But I wanted to say that lap 18 is when we see that start.
Did we ever think we'd hear the epic battle between the Haas and the Ferrari? I don't think so.
Yeah, the white Ferrari.
I mentioned that I had highlighted or underlined laps. Lap 23, I underlined 1 for the science penalty, and 2 because they had Christian Horner come on the broadcast. He was the team principal of the day on the broadcast. And they say, hey, Christian, how close do you think it's going to be between Max and Checo? And he says, well, our simulations are showing us with 3 laps left in the race, it's going to be a very close battle. What?
Like what?
We were on lap 23 of a 57 lap race. And you're talking 24 laps from now?
Yeah, they must have some crazy simulations, because you got to remember they're running this while the race is going, because otherwise how would he know that figure? I mean, he has to be punching in some kind of numbers from the race. So they're running simulations on how this race is going to turn out while the race is going. So that was pretty cool. I didn't know that.
I love that. It was like us seeing the Amazon striking distance thing, but those are usually limited to like 2 to 3 laps. This was a 34 lap striking distance calculation, which accurate. It was, I think it was accurate for where they were in the race. It turned out to be, I think, like the last 6 or 7 laps. But Perez's pit stop kind of threw a wrench in that, because Verstappen took the lead because Perez had to pit. So it was interesting how that played out. But so lap 23 was pretty key. Moving on down, and if I skip over any laps you want to make a note, let me know. Lap 30, I notated the strategy again that we talked about earlier. Half the grid starting on mediums, half the grid started on hards. Take out McLaren because they started on softs because they're dumb. The teams running on hards were targeting lap 40 for a pit change or for a pit stop. So if the team pitted earlier than lap 40, that means that they were going to have to make the mediums last longer than they wanted to, which would have been 17, 18 laps. Almost every team on the hards pit before lap 40. There was only 4 drivers on lap 40 that were still out and needed a pit. Lap 31, we had kind of a circuit Zandvoort smoke bomb moment almost, where there was random debris on the track that the drivers were having to swerve around and no one knew what it was or where it came from. I don't know if you watched the onboards and ended up seeing what it was.
No, I didn't check the onboards, but I definitely remember them talking about that in the broadcast. I was like, what? Why?
Lap 32, Lewis Hamilton is told to let George Russell pass. His battle is not with George Russell, it's with Ocon. And Lewis says something to the effect of, he can go by, but I'm not letting up.
Yeah, it was something to the effect of, I mean, basically exactly that. He's like, he can go by. I'm not going to fight him, but I'm also not going to back off.
Yeah. I'm going to skip from lap 31 to lap 46.
Okay, but if you're going to do that, I'm going to talk about 37 and 38 real quick.
Okay, because I did put I did put the who had yet to pit, and I put the Russell thing, but go ahead.
So for 37, we have Leclerc finally passes K-Mag, and then immediately gets passed back. And then they go for an entire lap, come back around to the start finish. And I noticed something smart that Charles did. The broadcasters brought it up after I had thought about it to kind of confirm my point. So I did want to mention it because they did that. Leclerc didn't overtake K-Mag on the DRS on the long back straight, and instead opted to pass K-Mag in the second DRS zone as they approached the start finish. Now, he did that so that K-Mag would not have the possibility of getting that DRS right across the start finish to try and get that pass back, which is exactly what he did on the previous lap. So that told me that Leclerc is actually thinking and not just doing the exact same thing over and over again. I just wanted to let everybody know it took Leclerc 38, basically 39 laps to pass Kevin Magnussen in the Haas.
Well, it's the same engine. It was the white Ferrari.
It was. And if you look at the side pods, they're the exact same.
I mean, it goes back to that point I made on Sainz not being able to pass Fernando Alonso in the Aston Martin. Like, there is something with that Ferrari car that just doesn't have that little bit of extra that I think they had last year. If you're wondering why I'm skipping from lap 31 to 41 and you're like, Thomas, there wasn't any action going on in 10 laps. No, there was. It was all the people on hards pitting for mediums. And so you had a ton of pit stops. You had a ton of people entering the track and all that, which set up some battles. But detailing all of those doesn't give you a lot in terms of this race, but in a lot of races it does. Like Jeremiah mentioned, lap 37, 38, there was battles going on in the top 10 between teams that you would not expect.
No.
Lap 46, Verstappen pits. So he took those hards 46 laps, comes out in second, and he has a 1.3 gap. Lap 47, Perez defends against Max at the end of lap 1. And you're like, okay, Sergio, you're playing a little game here. But then lap 48, Max, the Minister of Defense. Lap 48 starts, because a lot of the overtakes throughout the race were either at the end of a lap or the very beginning of the next one. I don't know what the last turn was, but it was either the last turn or turn 1, because you had some straights going into each of them. You had some overtaking opportunities. So Perez defends Max going to lap 48, but Max gets DRS on that home straightaway, passes Sergio going into the first turn 1, but they're both wheel to wheel for a little bit. And I thought we were going to have a Verstappen Ricardo moment again, but they both played it safe.
Oh, man.
Lap 49, I mentioned Lance Stroll earlier, working his way up the pack. He started in 18th. He had made his way up to, or he was battling Albon for 13th by lap 49. So he's getting there. He's still not at Fernando Alonso's level in that car, but he worked his way up the pack pretty well for starting in 18th.
Speaking of Fernando Alonso, what else happened on lap 49?
I noticed this. I took the note in lap 50, but maybe it did happen in lap 49.
It was 49.50.
Alonso asks where Lance Stroll is, and he says that was a great move into turn 1. He's watching TV.
The man is going through slow speed corners, and his eyes are just watching the race. He's like watching Lance Stroll make moves way back in the back. Not a care in the world. Nobody in front of him. Nobody behind him.
Tell Lance that was a great move at turn 1. He even knows what turn they're on.
I did want to note, no significance to the race whatsoever, but I thought I'd throw this in there just for funsies. Lance Stroll sets the fastest lap on lap 45. It immediately lost it. He lost it, but he had it. So that's cool.
That Aston Martin has shown that this year they have pace. I don't think there's any question about that. They don't have Red Bull pace, but they have pace. And my last note for the 57 lap race came on lap 54. So do you have anything else other than that?
No.
Okay. Lap 54. This really has nothing to do with the race. This was a funny note. George Russell's radio is pretty great. I like listening to George Russell's radio. He comes on and he's behind Fernando Alonso and he's like, is that Sergio Perez ahead of me? Like, man, I'm about to be in second place. And the team comes on and he's like, that is Logan Sargent. Poor George. He said something really funny after that too. He's like, oh, thought I was really close.
He was like, I was about to say.
Because I don't know if they told him or if it was the announcers that said it, but he was like 20 seconds behind Sergio Perez at that point.
Is that Sergio Perez? No, what?
So that takes you to the end of the race. The last little bit of action was Hamilton passing Leclerc for 6th. That happened on lap 54, 55 as well. Your race ends and it goes Max Verstappen winning the race from starting in P9. I mean, I'll say I saw that coming, although I really did think Perez could win. He just never got that dominant lead in the race. Verstappen just worked his way up the pack. And honestly, it's surprising that he did that. Like, it's not surprising that he did that, but the fact that Perez didn't get a massive lead in a race with no stoppages or safety cars, you can just fly wide open for all 57 laps, and he wasn't able to really pull ahead. So maybe that goes back to parity in F1, and things are getting a little bit closer than they were the past couple of seasons.
Well, I'll tell you why. And I kind of caught wind of this very early, and I'm not for it. Also, here's what I noticed. Sergio Perez came out on the mediums and he didn't open up that gap. You're right. The reason why is because they wanted to make him last on those mediums, which they thought was the faster tire, for as long as possible.
Yeah.
And the problem was that the mediums gave up on him. And my theory is, if we had seen Sergio out the gate push, give it everything you've got for 12, 14 laps, we're going to pull you, get you out on the hards, I think he could have had a better chance at winning that race.
That's not a bad take. I didn't even really consider the whole medium hard discussion to start, but you're right. They did have it because he was in the lead and he was holding that 2 to 3 second lead on Alonso. They just had him managing for a really long time. And to be fair, that's what he's best at. He's not track dominator, but he can manage and he can defend and he can keep a lead.
Well, see, that's where things are different this season. Because normally, yes, you're right. Checo is not a dominator. He is the guy who will manage his tires and he'll defend the people behind him. However, we have seen this in these past couple races. We've seen this like surgence of Sergio Perez where he's like, listen, this is my year. I'm winning this World Drivers' Championship. And because of that, I wanted to see him take more risks, man. I did, because you can't just make a claim saying I'm going to beat Max Verstappen without pushing right out the gate.
A grain of salt to what I said. He's not a dominator. The Red Bull car this year definitely is. He still finished 21 seconds ahead of third place. Him and Max are just so much further ahead of everybody else.
Well, that Red Bull car is just insane, man. I mean, we got to see it in full effect. We saw Max starting in 9th on hards rather, while the entire rest of the top 10 all on mediums, and he just soars through the pack, makes his way all the way to Fernando, passes Fernando, and starts making his way towards Checo. I'm like, Jesus, man.
They're so good. So your race finishes, your top 10 goes Verstappen, Perez, Alonso, Russell, Sainz, Hamilton, Leclerc, Gasly, Ocon, Magnussen.
And see, now we're going full circle back to my original point whenever we started this video. Alpine and K-Mag.
Okay, hang on. Not to question your glory to Alpine here. They did start the race 5th and 8th, and they finished 8th and 9th.
My point was they finished.
Are we going back to Australia where they both blow up? What are we doing here?
Well, because you got to remember, Gasly, he finished the race in this past race in Baku, and he was out. Well, if I'm not mistaken, wasn't he out of the points like by a lot?
He usually is.
Wrong, but
Gasly's a guy that works his way up the pack, not usually drops his way down.
Right, but Alpine in general for the first 5 races of the season, well, I guess first 4 because this 5th one they looked good. They have not looked impressive. They haven't looked good. They just now, I want to say, equalized McLaren, if that says anything.
They did look good in Australia, but then again, with like 2 laps left, they both exploded into each other. So, they had that, I guess. Good to see good to see K-Mag get some points. Yuki also finished in 11th. I think that's a really good showing for him. Yuki's had 2 good showings in the past week. He qualified super high in Baku, and then he came out here and got 11th. Obviously not points, but AlphaTauri has stunk in the past couple of seasons, so that's a good sign for them. As we go into the podium celebration, I watched all of it, and I didn't see any stupid football helmets brought out or put onto anybody.
Ooh, here's where I'm going to have to stop you. So they didn't wear any ridiculous football helmets. However, whenever they went into the driver's cool down room, if you noticed, they walked up to these lockers and there was a Miami Dolphins Verstappen jersey, Miami Dolphins Perez, and Miami Dolphins Alonso with a football helmet. Now, and I was thinking in my head when I saw that, I was like, are they about to walk out there in full gear? Because that is stupid.
I'm not going to disagree with you, but I made a note on the post race. I thought the football locker room waiting room was kind of a cool little gimmick.
It was. I was horrified that they were going to make them wear it.
Yeah, they didn't, which was good. But did you notice what they were standing on too? Was a little turf pad with yard markers on it. You know what?
Anything they can do.
It's better than them putting on 1960s football helmets.
Okay, so with the race over, we kind of have to talk semantics here. Started off, what did you think of the intro? Did you watch the intro?
Them running out to their names being called. Again, it's better than 1960s football helmets. Yeah. Was that what Sergio Perez was summoned to by the FIA? Did you see that? Sergio Perez was late.
He was late.
The little picky things that they get at. You know, I don't mind things like that because I'm sure the drivers love it. You know, like if we were there, like let's say this was Coda and we're there, we would have gone to that. We would have ate that up.
Oh yeah, easily. As far as everything else, golf cart ride to the podium. I understand that because the podium was in the middle of the stadium and they were not. But the golf cart was kind of cheesy. I mean, it had the first golf cart had the first place sticker on it, and then it already had Verstappen stenciled on the top of it, which, you know, for all intents and purposes, they could have done that 3 days ago, and we're like, yeah, we're pretty sure. I saw that. I did hear the announcers go. It was like they were. I forget the name of the stadium. This is the part that bothered me. It's like Hard Rock Stadium, I think.
Yeah, Hard Rock Stadium.
Okay, so he says the announcer, he goes, Hard Rock Stadium, home of the Miami Dolphins, home of Max Verstappen.
I will say real quick, tying back to your golf cart thing, probably the thing that is least professional sports about Formula One is when a driver crashes out of the race somewhere and they pick them up on like the back of a Vespa and they have to like hold on to another guy while they're going down the road. That looks like the least high-end sports thing ever.
I did have a couple other things. So I went and I watched the post-race interviews and they asked Max basically to go over his start to the race and kind of where his mindset was as he got overtaken by two people off the jump. He was purposely doing that. He actually had a pretty decent start if you looked at it, and purposely took as wide of a turn one as possible to just let everybody clear through, because ultimately he knew he had the car, so it was kind of pointless to make a move into turn one. They asked Fernando Alonso how he felt about his fourth podium in 5 races, and he said, you know, the first one was really a great surprise for the team. We really enjoyed it. But after 4 third places, I mean, you can't blame the man for wanting second or first. I mean, gosh.
Yeah, he. I think getting getting the monkey off his back with the Aston Martin setup and the new team and proving that he can actually go out there and compete was like, woo, okay, I'm back in it. And now that he's been back in it for 5 races, he's like, okay, I really want to be fully back in it now. Let me win something.
Yeah. I mean, I guess it could get it has to be lonely, right? Nobody's faster than you except for the Red Bulls, who are scary faster than you.
I think that's more lonely than if you're constantly winning every race. Cause like Verstappen's not getting tired of winning every single race, but getting second or third every single race. And you're just not pushing up into that next tier of greatness, you know?
Yeah, pretty much. And in the interviews, they asked Fernando Alonso to kind of go over his whole Lance Stroll had a great move into turn one thing. And Max kind of halted that before he had a chance to answer. And Max goes, "You're like a life coach." He's like, he's in reference to Baku the week before, where he's like, tell Lance what my brake balance is and let him know, or tell him that this is really good. He should use it. And now he's over here talking about that was a great pass into turn one. And Max is just, you're like a life coach, man.
Yeah. And again, if you're new to the sport and you're like, oh, Lance Stroll's dad pays Fernando Alonso's paycheck, he does not care 1 ounce about that.
Nope,
I think he just sees
not
that they're a
one
good
bit.
team. He sees that they're a good team and they can be competitive, so he wants to be fully competitive, right? He doesn't want his teammate losing points for them on the back end. He wants Lance getting just as many points so they can be a second place constructor.
Yeah, I think it'd be really cool if they kind of made a new role, because you know how when the driver's in the race, he really only communicates with the race engineer, but you can also talk to the team principal if he chooses so, right? Well, I was wondering, what if when Fernando retires, if they create a role for him where it's kind of like a live-in coach, race coach, like while he's racing. So like he's in Lance's ear and he's like, listen, that was a great turn. 10 meters further in before you start braking. Just 10 or
You
something
know what
like
you just
that. I think
made?
that'd be really cool.
So NASA, right, with astronauts, when you're
Okay.
an astronaut and you're in space, you only talk to other astronauts. At least that's how it used to be. I don't know what they're doing now. But like if you go back and watch any of like the old Apollo movies or like Apollo 13 or whatever, anytime the astronauts come on, they're not talking to a flight director, they're not talking to engineers. They only talk to other astronauts.
It makes sense because if you think about how intense it is to be an astronaut and how many things go into it, obviously it's not the same driving an F1 car, but there are a lot of similarities. There are things that you can constantly make corrections on, just like a ship. You can make a couple adjustments a few inches to the right, and it's the same thing racing these cars. If you take this turn a little bit sharper, then you can get out a lot faster with more top speed and you'll be way faster, like things like that. If he could just be in the ear, I think that'd be really cool.
Yeah, the driver can convey information in a way that makes sense to another driver.
Right, think like, for you American fans out there, think like your starting quarterback got injured, your backup's in, but the starting quarterback's talking to the backup through the helmet the entire game. They asked the drivers basically, what did you think of the new Miami track? And they all had a lot of positive things to say. They liked the change to the chicane that was way too tight. They opened that up a little bit. They liked the change to the asphalt. It was a lot more grippier and they had a better race because of it. It wasn't as hot. So kind of like all around way like leaps and bounds from last year.
It was a better viewing experience. I still don't necessarily like the tight right left into that last open DRS zone on the track before you get around to the start finish line. I think it's too congested. That's where in lap 1 I mentioned everybody was playing the follow the leader, and it's because by the time you get to that section, you can't pass, you can't do anything, and so it just bogs down the race. I think they need to split up those sections a little bit. They tried to add too much in too small of a window, but Miami as a whole was better this year than it was last year. I'll give them some credit.
Well, that's the chicane that they actually widened, or I don't know if they
Yeah,
widened it. I think they or
it's just
lengthened
not
it, one or
enough.
the other. Yeah, I'd agree. It's very congested. It's very Monaco feeling. Um, so the last couple notes that I had, one, they I forgot about this. So they asked Max Verstappen. He said, "Max, you were booed." Max, you were booed before the race started, and then afterwards when you were on the podium. What are your thoughts on that? And he was basically like, if I was at the very back of the grid, they wouldn't be saying anything at all about me. I think it's just a matter of when you're the one winning, if you're not the one that everybody else wants winning, then you're going to get the boos. And he said, but ultimately, I don't care, because as long as I'm standing on the top of the podium and I'm the one going home with the trophy, and then they all can go home to their house and have a nice evening. And that's how he worded it. And I loved that little last part because everybody knew what he was trying to say. It's basically like, okay, shut up. You don't understand. But he was like, and everybody have a wonderful evening.
I'll be honest, I don't really know where America's allegiances lie. I know there's a ton of Verstappen fans here. I'm a Verstappen fan and all that. There's a ton of Hamilton fans just because they bandwagoned on the championships when Drive to Survive started, which is cool. That's fine. But you also see Lando Norris fans and you see Charles Leclerc and Carl. Like, I think America just right now is super divided on where the fan base is. And so, yeah, when you have Max Verstappen dominating, he's going to get booed by the 90% of the population that isn't his fans.
Well, it's a different thing, right? Because when you're talking about, if you watch American sports, you root for the home team always. The problem is that our home team has been the laughing stock of F1 for like 6 seasons straight. and now are pretty decent. And I root for Haas on every single race for every single season that I've followed so far, because I like them. I like the personalities. I like Gunther, and I like the fact that it's the American team. But the fact of the matter is that that's not going to get the American fan base excited. So ultimately, what they're doing now is, instead of picking somebody and standing behind them, and I'm going with him throughout the entire race, it's more of like this: I'm a fan of the sport, and I have multiple people that I like.
Yeah, no, I agree. Now, to your Haas allegiance, as soon as Andretti enters the sport, you're flipping sides.
1,000%, 100%, without a doubt. If Andretti joins the team, and if Andretti joins the grid, they are my team. Let it be known now.
He's going to start selling merch before they're even a team.
I'm going to go talking to I'm going to walk up to Mario. Hey, listen, I drew up some t-shirt designs. What do you think?
You're going to be at Coda this year with a shirt that says on the back, Andretti F1 Racing. And people are like, they're not
Andretti shirts.
They're not a team, sir. They will be.
Oh, man. Final point. None of the drivers like the intro. They said they were fine with it if it's a temporary thing, or if it's like once out of the whole season. Fernando said it shouldn't happen at all, just because he was like, why should the American fans be the only one that gets that? The American fans aren't better than the Italian fans or the French fans or the Japan fans and all this, or the Mexico fans. And he was like, we should keep the show the same. And to that respect, I get it. Here's what I think they should do. What if they moved that intro, that awesome dragged out intro where they say everybody's name and all of that, everybody walks out and confetti and a bunch of stuff. What if they did that in the first race of the season for like all rain?
You're onto something there. Or if you're going to do it in only specific races, do it in FP3, right? Because FP3 and qualifying are the same day. And so all your fans are going to be there anyways. I think the reason they don't like it, again, they probably do like it, especially the newer drivers, the rookie drivers, and the fans certainly love it. Probably the reason they don't like it is, one, it adds something to their schedule for that day, which they only want to be thinking about racing on race day. And two, if it's Fernando Alonso that said they aren't doing this everywhere else, they probably don't want to do that 23 times a year. And they're saying, if this goes well in Miami, if it goes well in Miami, we're going to do it in every other race. And they don't want to do that.
That's exactly what the drivers said. They said, if it's once in a season or once or twice, that's fine, but it's a long season and it's just unnecessary for us to do that at every race. George Russell was kind of thrown out there saying that he didn't really enjoy the fact that he had to sit in full gear for 30 minutes before he even got in his car. And to that point, I understand, because that's typically the time where they're talking to their engineers. They're doing the final bits. They're making sure that everything is right. All the systems have been checked. There's not going to be any faults. There's not going to be any problems. You talk to the strategist, make sure that your strategy is crisp, and make sure that there's no kind of last minute additions that you need to do, or maybe change like when you pit, stuff like that. These are all conversations that, for those that you don't know, they happen right before the race, because you had the overnight weather. You wake up the next morning, conditions are different. You're looking at the other teams. Okay, what are they starting on? How is this going to look? Maybe we should go with this. Maybe we should look at pit. The practice sessions told us mediums weren't that hot. Maybe we should look at pitting 5 laps earlier. All these conversations happen right before the race when they were doing their intros.
Not only that, but you're talking about 30. It's only an hour and a half race. So now you're talking about another 30 minutes in full gear, and you're in Miami where it's 90 to 100 degrees and 90% humidity. They are uncomfortable before the race even starts.
Oh, yeah. Like half their water gone before the race starts. That's all that I got for the race. Is there anything that you wanted to add?
That's all I've got. If y'all are listening to these race recaps and you have any thoughts or suggestions, or if you notice something in the race that we missed, feel free to call it out, leave us a comment, send us an email, however you'd like to do it, but we would certainly appreciate the feedback.
Yes, I said it once, I'll say it again and again. Comment down below. We want to know what your thoughts are. If you change up how we're kind of doing these things, if we need to spend more time here, or maybe focus on this instead, just let us know, man. We want to know what your thoughts are. It would make the show better for y'all, and it would make it better for us. So just let us know.
Absolutely. That is it for the 2023 Miami Grand Prix. We will see you.
Bye, guys.